three speakers. God speaks some of the time, the servant speaks some of the time, and the prophet speaks as well. So we have three people interceding, and as we come to the end, God will speak again. Let's turn to the verses, please. And let's read verses 4 through 6. Will someone please do that?
Surely he has borne our infirmities and carried our diseases. Yet we accounted him stricken, struck down by God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the punishment that made us whole, and by his bruises we are healed. And we like sheep have gone astray. We have all turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all.
Why does God bring this punishment, do you think?
The people keep straying from him.
Yeah.
Start worshiping, continually move to worshiping false gods.
And as we're reading these verses, we must not think too much of Jesus, because he hasn't appeared yet. However, it certainly sounds like what happened to him during the crucifixion and resurrection some 700 years later. But the person being accused and bruised, if you will, in these verses is the nation of Israel. And essentially that's expanded, according to the writer, to all nations. So what is being spoken here by the prophet, by the servant, and by God is directed not only to Israel, but to all nations. And God is wanting Israel to be the leader in this. Let's read verses 10 and 11, please. Someone.
Yet it was the will of the Lord to crush him with pain. When you make his life an offering for sin, he shall see his offspring and shall prolong his days. Through him the will of the Lord shall prosper. Out of his anguish he shall see light. He shall find satisfaction through his knowledge. The righteous one, my servant, shall make many righteous, and he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore I will allot him a portion with the great, and he shall divide his spoil with the strong, because he poured out himself to death, and was numbered with the transgressors. Yet he bore the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressions.
As we go back and consider verse 10, it was the will of the Lord to crush him with pain. And I can't understand sometimes why we have a Lord that wants to punish us so severely. And yet, as the Lord crushes this servant with pain, he speaks that he will remember the sacrifices of the servant and let the servant see the results of the price he pays with this pain. Now in the verses that are read there, they come to a very interesting definition, a very interesting standard that God has set up. The servant cannot be a true servant. He cannot be a true sacrificer if he does it for a price. He has to do it completely voluntarily with no expectation of any sort of return. But yet here in the 10th verse, God is offering and saying that he will allow the servant to see the good results of his suffering and of his pain. Any of you have any thoughts about that, or any perspective on what's going on here? Jane?
Well, I always think that we think of this in a prophecy towards Jesus' life, but I read that this was for the people of Israel at this time too. This wasn't something they were talking about going to happen in the future too.
That's right. It's all in today's world for them. As we go to verse 11, out of his anguish he shall see light, and he shall find satisfaction through his knowledge. And that's the knowledge God promises to let him know about after it's over. The righteous one, my servant, shall make many righteous, and he shall hear, and he shall bear their iniquities. God speaks of the servant in this verse. He will not be rewarded, but will revel in knowing that he has saved others and brings to many a saving knowledge of God's love and forgiveness. And so there's a lot of things being established, a lot of things going on here. And in verse 12, the servant took upon himself the sins of many, not only for glory, but for voluntary and with not expectation of reward. Only after the sins were voluntarily accepted did the servant learn that God would abundantly bless him. A portion of the great is a Middle Eastern cliche suggesting honor and esteem. And that comes from victorious soldiers and warriors splitting up the spoil that they loot as they become successful in their endeavors. The only portion of the great that I ever received was a box of cigars.
Cliff,
Yes.
have you ever considered the possibility that verses 10 and 11 are talking about the nation of Israel rather than a person? Because sometimes in these prophecies, the whole nation was referred to as a person. For instance, verse 11, out of his anguish he shall see light. Couldn't that be the land of Israel in their anguish and their suffering? They can see the light coming, which would be the one who would deliver them.
Very good point. That's exactly what is meant.
It was mentioned last week too. Scholars have argued about, are they talking about the nation of Israel or individuals? So that's up for grabs, I think.
We missed last week, so.
It's interesting, if you look in the book on page 66, talks about Isaiah 53:7, he was opposed and he was afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. And then if you drop down, 53:7 again, like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, God's servant was innocent of violence and deceit, 53:9. That tends to make me think that they're making a prophecy towards Jesus
Right.
and referring to him in this.
The verses are sort of intermeshed, in my opinion. Some of them are referring to the Messiah, and that one is. But others, I think, are referring to the nation of Israel as a whole.
Don't they know that's not nice to mix stories?